Capitol Report is a production of Senate Media Services.
This week, Senate Housing Chair Lindsey Port and Republican lead Eric Lucero weigh in on the unfinished student apartment situation at the University of Minnesota, possible landlord-tenant reforms, and homelessness prevention efforts. Plus, a look at the Civil War flags in the Minnesota Capitol. Stay tuned for this week's Capitol Report. Welcome to this week's program. I'm Shannon Loehrke. An apartment complex called Identity Dinkytown near the University of Minnesota was expected to open at the end of August, before classes began. Construction remains ongoing, and students who signed leases to live in the new building have been left with limited options as they begin their studies. Several students recently appeared before the Senate's Higher Education and Housing and Homelessness Prevention Committees to describe their plight.
The balance of power in off-campus student housing has always favored the landlord, especially because these are often first-time renters who are just hoping for a smooth transition to college and a safe space throughout the school year. Identity used their position as a landlord in this scenario to engage in predatory practices. The taking of rent before notifying the tenants that the building would not be ready was outrageous, especially because of how late in the summer students were being informed.
I knew when I signed this lease that it was going to be extremely expensive, but I wanted to live with my best friends in a new building with the accommodations that they promised. I diligently worked this entire summer to save up so I could afford to live here, and now this situation has arisen. The money I saved up is now going towards paying for parking ramps, metered parking, gas, and food.
The construction delays may have been unpreventable, but I would like to see more accountability being taken and honesty throughout the process. Students living at the Identity should have the opportunity to get out of their lease, or rent should be reduced significantly. Paying some of the top rates for an apartment that is half finished with no amenities does not make any sense to me.
Everyone we spoke to was made aware that my family lived nowhere near Minneapolis and we were uncomfortable with the housing accommodations provided to me. Each time we were met with an "I understand, but," and "there's nothing we can do."
Joining me in the studio to talk more about the Identity Dinkytown apartment complex and other housing issues is the chair of the Senate Housing and Homelessness Prevention Committee, Senator Lindsey Port. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me, Shannon.
You and Senator Omar Fateh, the chair of the Senate Higher Education Committee, convened a meeting recently to delve into the matter of the Dinkytown apartment complex. What did you take away from that meeting?
You know, the stories that the students shared were so impactful because I think you can think about it in an academic way, but when you hear about the real life struggles of trying to move into your apartment the first week of school and suddenly having no place to live, those impacts were immediate. They require an immediate solution. And I think we also sort of, as we delved into it more, realized that this has some broader implications rather than just this identity building.
And we'll get to the broader implications in a moment, but considering first that these students were left without a place to live, vague answers as to when their apartments might become available, should the students have the option to get out of their lease?
I think absolutely. When you sign a contract with someone, you are both responsible for holding your end of that contract up. And this is sort of one area of the law where that's not necessarily true. The landlords are not providing what they said, a place to live with the amenities, with close to campus, all of those. They're not meeting that requirement of their contract. The students should absolutely be able to get out of those contracts.
And so then to go to the broader implications, is this simply a series of unfortunate events? Or it sounds like you think it points to broader problems, and what might those be?
Yeah, I think when we think about the balance of power between renters and landlords, landlord-tenant law really does favor landlords in a lot of ways. We made some great changes to it last year, but there are bigger implications. Most of our landlord-tenant law was written 50, 60, 70 years ago. Things have changed since then. Mail is not now the only way you can get communications. Updating some of the technology, the ways that people communicate, and also understanding that really both sides should have equal rights and protections under the law. So we're taking a look at sort of those broader implications and seeing if there are either minor tweaks that we need to make, like in this case, if you're not holding up your end of the lease as a landlord, people should be able to get out of that lease without having to take you to court. But also sort of, do we need just a broader rewriting of this area of law, an updating, if you will?
So a few of the changes that will become effective January 1st that were enacted in the last legislative session include a minimum temperature requirement of 68 degrees from October 1 to April 30th. Landlords must disclose all fees in terms of the price that the rent is, and they also must wait until 6 months before a lease is to expire before they can ask whether the person intends to renew. So you do say that there's more that should be done. Can you be more specific? There is, as you said, a power imbalance. And I know from the testimony, these students, because they are students, are not likely to take legal action. Should there be an avenue that doesn't involve legal action?
Yeah, I think so. You know, in a case like this, where it's clear that one end of the lease isn't being held up, there should be an easier mechanism to just say, look, you're not meeting this. Here's my documentation that you're not meeting it. I would like out of my lease. And that should be a pretty simple process. We also want to take a look this year at source of income requirements. Should it matter whether you're getting your money to pay rent partially from a voucher? Should it matter if you're on Social Security disability, things like that? Or if you can pay the rent, that should be sort of the end of the equation. So we're taking a look at that. It's something that's passed in other states and that our Department of Human Rights is really interested in as well.
So in current law, it is possible for the property owner to essentially discriminate based on the form of income that the potential tenant has?
Exactly, which, you know, if they can even put in, we don't accept vouchers. So if you accept vouchers, no matter how good the rest of your application is, no matter how much of a star tenant you are, you won't even get an option in some cases to have an interview for that apartment or to see it and have your application go through the process.
The Wall Street Journal last week published an article about why baby boomers are sliding into homelessness nationally. Here in Minnesota, Minnesota Public Radio did a story on the continued high rate of eviction filings across the state, noting causes like inflation and inadequate wages. Both articles suggest that things like car repairs or sudden medical expenses are the causes for putting people in a state of being unhoused. How would you like to see this addressed?
You know, I think we have to look at the whole spectrum and have to include housing as we think about just basic living needs. Wages have not gone up in the same way that housing has. Housing has gotten significantly more expensive over the last 30 years. And there's really no way for the average renter or homeowner to keep up with that on current wages. That often hasn't been a part of the conversation. Housing has sort of been kept over in its own bucket. And, you know, people are like, oh yeah, rents are going up. That's just life. But when we look at why, and is there a role that government needs to play in making sure that we are producing enough subsidized housing that actually meets the needs of people, and that housing is safe, affordable, that it's climate friendly, economically feasible for families, that it fits the folks who need it. You know, we have a large immigrant population here in Minnesota that has need for larger apartments or homes because they live multi-generationally. That's a thing we should be taking into account as we're investing, this $1 billion that we put into it. But I think the other piece is not looking at folks who are on the brink of becoming unhoused or near a housing crisis as sort of like, oh, they must have done something, they must have gotten themselves into a hole. It is really something that touches all walks of life, all age groups. We're seeing it, as you said, expand in baby boomers now, but there are too many kids in Minnesota who don't have a place to live. There are too many seniors, veterans. It really does span all of our residents, and it's something we need to take seriously.
In a similar vein then, today, Axios reported on a decision in Dakota County to stop a permanent homeless shelter in the suburbs there, citing pushback from residents. Unhoused people have tended to congregate in Minneapolis and St. Paul, but suburban areas are starting to see a greater influx of unhoused people. Record funding was passed, as you mentioned, last session to address some of these concerns. But if residents themselves don't support these additional services, then what is the next step?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a huge concern. We have to get past that point. And I think it really starts all with conversations. We really tried to focus in my committee this last year on the humanity of what housing crises look like, the families that are facing these crises. It's easy to think of a stereotype, whether you're talking about people who are unhoused or, as I talked about a lot this last year, people who use cannabis. It's really easy to have sort of a stereotype that you just like write off as someone else. The more we tell the real stories of how Minnesotans are existing and living and getting to these crisis points, the more it is easy to understand that you want your community to be a place where there's a solution for that, an answer for that. And as we've looked across the country at places that really have invested, and actually across the world, that have invested in ending homelessness, it is the most financially feasible option. It is less expensive than keeping people on social services and emergency services. It lowers the cost of healthcare. It creates better economic outcomes for jobs and education. It really is the solution that is best for all of our communities. It's going to take time and hearing stories, learning about each other, and continuing to have these conversations to make those changes, but I'm really hopeful we'll get there.
So briefly before we go, can you preview one thing that you know you will tackle next legislative session?
Absolutely. My vice chair, Senator Liz Bolden, is carrying the bill to ban corporate ownership of single-family homes. We really saw a lot of hedge funds buying up single-family homes over the pandemic and in the years since. And that keeps them from folks who now, through our down payment assistance, would be able to buy those homes. We want to make sure they stay in the hands of Minnesotans, so that'll be top of our list.
Senator Lindsey Port, it's always a pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Shannon.
To talk more about the unfinished Dinkytown apartment complex and other housing concerns is the Republican lead of the Senate Housing and Homelessness Prevention Committee, Senator Eric Lucero. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
You wear several hats that inform your perspective on housing issues. You are a licensed real estate agent, a licensed general contractor. You're also a landlord. What's your perspective on the recent Senate hearing on the delayed completion of the Identity Dinkytown project and its impact on students?
Absolutely. I think, as we saw highlighted, this is a terrible situation. Being a college student, former college student myself, having gone to the University of Minnesota, clearly the impact, the negative impact, the stress that this is causing on students is absolutely devastating. This is not a good situation. It's one that I'm very appreciative that we had a hearing to highlight the complications and the struggles that the students are going through, and then to be able to have a productive conversation on what we could do from a statewide perspective going forward in terms of policy. But one of the things that is always in the back of my mind when it comes to any conversation on any bill is we don't want to create state law, policy across the board on specific situations. We don't want to have a knee-jerk reaction in response to an unfortunate situation. Because when it comes, as you mentioned, as a housing provider myself, there are many different types of housing across the state. In this case, it's student housing. But there are single-family homes, there's multifamily homes, there's high-rises, there's all kinds of different scenarios. And we cannot create this one-size-fits-all policy in response to a crisis, and again, think that that's not going to have unintended consequences.
If a company or building that is building a new apartment building collects rent from lessees while knowing that that project will not be completed on time, which is what is happening here in Dinkytown, should lessees be allowed to break their lease so that they can find another place to live?
Well, a lease fundamentally is a contract. And in any contract, there are two parties. In this case, there are tenants and then there's the housing provider. And when it comes to any contract, there are obligations and expectations of both sides of this, the contract. What's happening here is the housing provider is not delivering their end of the contract. And so should a person be expected to pay rent? Absolutely not. Now, when it gets to the next questions, it's, well, what is the cause for the delay? How long will it be until the unit is available? And therein lies the greater question when it comes to breaking a contract. Because, as I mentioned in the previous question, one size fits all policy cannot necessarily work in all different types of scenarios. And so in this case, certainly the unit is not available per the contract. So Identity Dinkytown is not living up to their end of the bargain. So then, should there be an expectation to pay rent? Clearly not. When will it be available? That's the question. Now, it's my understanding from written testimony submitted by Identity Dinkytown Property Management is that the general contractor project manager informed the project management company the day after first month's rent was collected. So I don't know if they knew that it wouldn't be completed or not, but the reality is contracts need to be adhered to, and we need to be understanding that rent shouldn't be paid in such a scenario.
This situation is just bringing up lots of questions, which we're exploring. Another question I have is, this Dinkytown issue is likely an uncommon situation, and it's complex, as you've said, in very unique ways. However, Housing and Homelessness Prevention Chair Lindsey Port did say to the committee that landlord-tenant laws have not been updated in this state in quite some time. From a broader perspective, do you believe that there is a need to update landlord-tenant law in the state of Minnesota?
All laws in the state of Minnesota absolutely need to have review and updating where necessary. But just because a law might be old doesn't necessarily mean it's wrong or needs to be changed. What needs to happen is understanding that there's an equation. And in this equation, on one side you have the housing provider, and on the other side you have the tenants. And it has to be a balanced equation. My concern with the current Democrat majority is that they're only focused on one side of the equation, lacking the perspective of the housing providers. Here's the reality. If this equation becomes imbalanced, when there's more risk that's created by the housing provider or on the housing provider, they can only make up for that increased risk by increasing the price. So the more risky it is, the longer it takes to go through whatever requirements and mandates that the Democrat majority wants to put in there, the more risky it becomes for them, and then the more they raise rent. That is not good for anybody. The other thing that's puzzling to me, though, is this last legislative session, incredible changes were made to tenant landlord law. And so it was very puzzling when I heard the remarks from Chair Port. I did hear her say that in coming next session, but again, the Democrat majority made significant changes already. So I'm not entirely sure what she's referring to when she says that.
Last session, several DFL members introduced a bill that would prohibit real estate developers from purchasing single-family homes and turning them into rentals. And I'm not trying to conflate that issue with the Dinkytown issue, but a concern was raised in the hearing about the idea of out-of-state corporate ownership of apartment complexes, which Dinkytown is, I believe, an example of. So when affordable housing is scarce, and this goes to your point about increased risk, is it appropriate to look at limiting corporate or out-of-state ownership as a way of controlling cost?
When there's a limit in supply, the most appropriate question to be asking is, what is the reason why there's a limit in supply? And the reason that there's a limit in supply has nothing to do with corporate entities purchasing real estate. Now, a larger question for a different time, or a larger answer would be, what is the difference, or why does it matter what type of entity is on title? Whether it's an individual, whether it's a partnership, whether it's an LLC or LLP, whether it be an S Corp or a C Corp. It doesn't matter who is on title. What matters is that tenants are treated fairly and protected, and that housing providers are similarly protected. Whether they're in-state or out-of-state, the corporate entity or the entity type doesn't matter. And so what we need to focus on is, why is there a lack of supply? That's the appropriate question to be asking. And the clear answer why there's a lack of supply is because there hasn't been building. Hasn't been building at the rates to keep up with demand. Why hasn't there been building to keep up with the rates of demand? Clearly, it's because of government overregulation. If you look at an examination earlier this year, I think it was March, a study was released showing the cost of new construction of a medium-priced single-family home. And in Minnesota, it is $100,000 more expensive to build in Minnesota than it is in North Dakota. $120,000 more expensive to build the same median single-family priced home in Minnesota than it is in Wisconsin. $150,000 more expensive to build that home in Minnesota than it is in Iowa, and $175,000 more expensive to build in Minnesota than in South Dakota. So the question becomes, why is that? Do we have different climates than South Dakota and Wisconsin? No. Are they suffering the same types of pressures for labor and building material costs? Absolutely. So those are the same. What is different then? It is government regulation. The cost of construction in Minnesota has skyrocketed, and the answer certainly cannot be introducing more government mandates thinking that's going to be a solution.
As lawmakers gear up for the next legislative session, what areas of housing and homelessness prevention need the most attention in your view, and what legislation might you be proposing?
Well, as I mentioned in a previous question, skyrocketing housing prices are creating a hardship on everybody. So the question becomes, what is the root cause of increasing costs of housing, whether it be rent or whether it be home ownership? And the reality is, as I mentioned, it is not any of these other variables such as weather, climate, or labor or building material costs, because those are similar in surrounding states. The question is not why is it expensive in Minnesota, but why is it more expensive in Minnesota? So the conversation and the legislation last session and that I'll be doing next session focused on is that root cause, addressing the skyrocketing prices. Now, how do we do that? We roll back the government mandates. It is the government mandates that are increasing risk on housing providers. That increased risk translates into increased rental prices. It is the increased building code and energy mandates that are increasing the cost of construction. Those get passed on. And so we need to address government mandates, rolling some of those back to be more competitive and comparable to our surrounding states, and therefore decrease the cost of living.
Senator Eric Lucero, it's a pleasure to have you on the program.
Thank you so much.
In a grand ceremony, Minnesota veterans of the Civil War marched behind their battle flags as they were moved from the state's second state capitol in downtown St. Paul to the new building on the Hill. Many of those flags have been restored, and historian Brian Pease explains more. Minnesota began a tradition of displaying battle flags after the Battle of Bull Run in 1861, and there was a huge public ceremony in 1905 to bring the battle flags that were in the collection from the old Capitol to the new Capitol in 1905. What have these flags been doing since then?
Well, that's an important part of Minnesota's history in recognizing the Minnesota men's involvement in the Civil War. So by virtue of putting the first battle flag on display in the first Capitol, you set that tradition and that sense of honor and pride to display those flags that these men were dying under as a part of that tradition in Minnesota. So when those old veterans back in 1905 were coming with their flags tightly wrapped around the flagstaff up to this brand new Capitol, this was a great sense of pride and honor, because thousands of people came out in this parade to watch, probably for a lot of these men, the last time they ever marched under their flag.
The flags were housed in these display cases, all wound up in tatters. And then in the 60s, there was an effort to unfurl them so that you could see them more as they would have been on the battlefield. What was the story behind that?
Yeah, what was happening, you're getting to the centennial of the Civil War in the 1960s. And so if you were to walk by these cases in the 1960s, you would have seen pieces of the flag on the floor in the case. So they were deteriorating. And it didn't help that they were tightly wrapped around those flag staffs. And so in 1963 and 1964, Tom Welter from St. Paul was hired to conserve the flags. And so he was very innovative. There weren't a lot of people in the United States conserving flags at that time, so he took it upon himself to design a special sewing machine that would put zigzag stitching so you can encapsulate the original silk in between silk crapling and then keep all the pieces together, and then you could hang it from a flagstaff unfurled so you could start seeing elements of those flags once again revealed.
So you could really see the flag hanging on the pole. But at some point, 2009, I think, they came to look as they look now. What's the story behind that?
What we were doing is we were always looking at the flags, and we could see where the zigs and the zags were taking place in those unfurled flags. You had more separation taking place of the fabric, and that kept all the pieces together, but gravity was really taking a toll. They had been on display for decades, and so you were seeing fading patterns in the kind of the top of the flag. So we really wanted to make sure we preserve these very important artifacts of Minnesota's history. So the Minnesota Historical Society took the lead in conserving the flags, taking them off those flag staffs or the flag poles, and then mounting them flat on specially designed panels. So now we can have those flags on display flat. And we had mentioned before, some of those flags had never been seen unfurled before. Well, for probably 150 years, some of these flags had never been seen flat before.
How many flags are in the collection and how often do they rotate?
Yeah, there's 59 that are part of this collection. There's others that are part of the Minnesota Historical Society collection, and we rotate in over time 48 different flags. Some of the flags that are part of the collection are just very small remnants, so there's not really a lot to see, and we want to protect those historic relics, just keep them under darkness as much as possible. So every 8 to 9 months we have 4 new flags that we rotate in. We try to equal the number of regimental flags and national colors. And of the 4 display cases here too, we do have a flag case for the Spanish-American War, because those flags were also transferred to this brand new capital in 1905.
I read that some of the bravest men in the Civil War were those that carried the colors. They marched 6 paces in front of their regiment and were basically the steering wheel for their men.
Yeah, it was, for those color bearers, that was a sense of pride and honor, because they were selected among the regiment. They were some of the most popular, the most physical, the most respected men, because you're carrying those flags for a purpose, and that's to protect those flags and to make them very visible during campaigns or battles as you're marching into battle or in battle. And so to carry that color, not only were you helping control the direction of the unit as it's going into battle or retreating out of battle, but you also put yourself as a big target, because each side was trying to shoot down those color bearers, because they were, once again, a communication device. And so for those men fighting around those flags, that's representing their nation. That's what they're fighting for, preserving the Union. Or they're fighting with their regimental color, their state color, fighting for their home, fighting for what they believe is an important part of their participation in the Civil War.
Do you have a favorite flag?
Well, the one behind us is the flag from the 4th Minnesota Infantry Regiment. And as far as we know, this probably saw a lot of service as in their campaign to Vicksburg. And so once again, that flag staff was being held by those color bearers. And you can imagine through all those miles of marching and battles, there's the blood, the stains, the sweat, the tears, the dirt, all that history is part of that story. And so when you look at each of these flags, they might not have seen a lot of service, but they were, important parts of Minnesota's history and what these men were fighting for.
Join us again next week as we delve into more topics affecting Minnesotans. I'm Shannon Loehrke, and on behalf of all of us at Senate Media Services, thanks for watching.